Mr. Allard's Neighborhood. This is the place where you're entitled to Brad's opinion. And now for your host, Brad Allard.
Well, guys, how y'all doing today? We're trying something new today. The bandwidth in my house is being used up by all the other occupants of the house, so I've been told that my last couple of shows were a bit pixelated, so I brought here the studio with the expert here.
Hey.
So, yeah, we'll be up in the bandwidth at the house pretty soon, but for the time being, we're going to do the solo shows here as well as the guest shows. Today, I'm going to talk about problems in China. Now, I hope y'all, my listening audience, have some familiarity with it. I think it's something we really need to pay attention to because the problems in China are not going to be solely kept within China. They're going to be worldwide problems. And they are on the verge of a very, very significant meltdown, very similar in many ways to what we experienced in 2008. And they don't have the tools, and they don't have the system to cope with it like ours did. Even though we did cope with it, I think, somewhat imperfectly, they don't even have that. And so that's going to be a real issue. But anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about it. I got a couple of clips and whatnot from the news that helps explain what's going on. And these problems are not going to be solved by just a temporary policy fix. One in particular, I think, is going to have long-term ramifications. So anyway, let's just go through the first round of sponsors here. I got a text here from Miss Camille. By the way, it's her birthday next week, and on her birthday, she'll be on the podcast.
Hey.
So, yeah, next week is our 4th anniversary, so to speak. We started in 2019, the day after Labor Day. And what number show is this?
This is episode 494 or 5?
Yeah,
5.
Close enough. But anyway, she's going to be here. She was a frequent guest before she had to get a real job, so to speak. But anyway, you've already sent me the link, right? I'm trying to find it here. Come on. There it is. Anyway. So thank you to our friends at CrossFit Burleson, 317 Southwest Wilshire. They got the plans, they got the classes, they got the programs, they got the trainers, so you're not having to go out there and figure it out yourself. They're going to have people there that are going to help you with what you need to have done. So check out their webpage, CrossFitBurleson.com, and see what the membership plans is, times of classes, on and on. It's all there, so check that out. Also, thank you to Shandy Stogstill. She's still selling real estate. And the market has slowed down. I've talked to her. I've talked to Candy Gal last week. It has slowed down here, not like in some places in the country where it's basically shut down almost. But the interest rates are something that if you're looking to move in the area, you need to talk to Candy, you need to talk to her. Now, there are still homes available here in Burleson, so check it out. Also, thank you to Otto at our place. Always good as always. That sounds funny. Always good as always. Well, anyway, it's always good. And it always has great service. And it's just a great atmosphere to do business in. And I really enjoy just sitting there and talking with him and others because there's a lot of people that are just, like so many regulars that you just really kind of develop some friendships there. So it's a good place to do things, and I'm really excited about it. Also, thank you to Wild Cigar. I was there yesterday, a little sponsor care. Talked to Nathan, Chris's partner. Nathan is basically there during the days quite a bit. And, I walked in about 3:30, and there was about half a dozen people there, and they're doing business, and they were enjoying a drink and a smoke and had their laptop and whatever else. It's a great place to go in the afternoon, and it was quiet, which is what I liked. They had the baseball games on mute, but it was just a nice place to go and do business. So check out Wild Cigar over at the Standard. Also, Tiffany, Nico over at the Local Life. The magazine will be coming out very soon. Next week, it goes to 30,000 homes and businesses. It's a great way to advertise. It's very direct marketing, and so if you're looking to get your name out there, it's a good way to advertise in this community. Also, check out Burleson Buzz with Cody O'Brien. He's working to make this a local newspaper, if you will, without the paper, of course. And they're going to give you updates on not just the Cleburne Railroaders, which is kind of nice, but also city council meetings, school board meetings, school business, whatever else that's going on in this community. So check out Burleson Buzz, and have very, very affordable subscription rates. So check that out as well. Okay, here's the drill about China. There is numerous problems that they're going to have. The problem that China is having aren't going to be fixed overnight, and so I kind of broke them down to various categories. That's the word I want to use, and also have some clips here. So I want to play the first one, Taylor. This is from CBS News, and so we'll see what they have to say.
China's yuan is at a 16-year low, and the country appears to be experiencing deflation. Economists say these are signs China could be facing an extended economic downturn. Lana has more on what's caused this crisis. Lana?
Yeah, real estate, because for decades, a strong housing market propelled China's economy forward, and it lifted millions of people out of poverty. In early 2020, property accounted for 59% of household wealth. That's according to a survey by the People's Bank of China. But it also created a leaning tower of debt. That same survey found that property accounted for 3/4 of household liability. Now, that's a pattern that's repeated outside of individuals because the growing property market helped to fuel rapid local government growth, but it also led to the accumulation of $12.8 trillion of debt. So with all of that liability, let's take a look at what's happening in China right now, because the housing market became wobbly after multiple real estate companies became overwhelmed by their debt. One of the largest, Country Garden, has $200 billion in unpaid bills, and it's inching closer to defaulting on its loans. Now, the property market defaults are also having an effect on shadow banking. Now, that's lending that's done outside of traditional banks. Unlike here in the U.S., the Chinese real estate market is particularly dependent on shadow banks. They're responsible for an estimated 43% of China's GDP. Now, another issue for China's economy: young adults. Youth unemployment is at 21%, and it has become so bad that the Chinese government has stopped reporting it. Let's give you some context. That actually means that 1 out of every 5 Gen Zers is currently unemployed in China. And as you can imagine, if you're unemployed, paying rent is a challenge. Buying a house feels unattainable. So all of this, along with global economic trends, have really created a spiraling crisis for China's economy. And that can be bad news for the rest of us. China is the #2 economy in the world. And in particular, countries like Zambia, Malaysia, and Chile, well, they have high commodity export rates to China. And for global corporations, a lack of consumer demand is expected. That's a big deal when you consider that the 200 biggest multinationals in America, Europe, and Japan made 13% of their sales in China. Now, there is also some additional concerns that domestic economic crises could push the Chinese government to try and make more aggressive moves against Taiwan. Maybe then it could gain access to the strong Taiwanese economy, but also that might distract from the crisis at home. Elaine.
All right, Lana, thank you.
Well, that kind of summarizes it. So I'll see you next week. No, I can't do that. But anyway, that really was a good summation of some of the things I want to say. First of all, one of the things that really has concerned me about China is the fact that they are in such colossal debt as individuals and as corporations, and particularly in the real estate sector. That's going to have a domino effect similar to what happened to us in 2008. Right now, I was looking at a couple of companies in particular. They mentioned one in the clip, Country Garden. Another one's called Evergrande, and they say that the real estate sector as a whole owes lenders and vendors $390 billion that's at risk of not being paid. Okay, you're talking about $390 billion that's owed to the Chinese people and banks that is not going to get paid. If they default on these two companies in particular, Evergrande and Country Garden default, it's going to have a massive ripple down effect. It ain't going to be a trickle down; it'll be a tsunami down, because you're going to trigger all sorts of businesses going out of business. And the thing about China, they do not have bankruptcy laws like we do. You know, in our situation, we filed Chapter 11. They go through reorganization and some sort of relief and whatnot, and you work out to deal with the creditors. In China, if you're out of business, you're out of business, and if you don't pay, you don't pay, and it's going to work all the way down to the painters and the framers and the carpenters and whatever else. Right now, 1/5 of all apartment units in China are unoccupied, and you think, well, wait a minute. You know, I thought there were, China was the most populous nation in the world. Why are they? You'd think their problem would be over demand for houses, not oversupply. Well, the truth is, They have a vast amount of unused real estate. They develop so fast. In particular, they have these ghost cities. Literally, they're outside of Beijing and Shanghai and these other areas that are almost unpopulated. Yet they're supposed to be for Chinese people living in like a suburb, but they're not going to the suburbs. Why? Because A, they can't afford it. B, the transportation in China is so bad that their mass transit is basically it's terrible. I bet you've seen those YouTube clips of people being shoved into the subways, packed in like cattle. But it's so people don't move out there, and they can't afford it anyway. The job market and the debt market is so rough on most of the Chinese consumers that they don't have the wherewithal to buy these units anyway. So, like I said, 1 out of 5 units have been built and they stand empty. And as far as existing units, again, because there's this excess market, a supply of units, the value of the homes that they bought, and see, when we talk about homes, it's almost all apartment units, condominiums, if you will. Because there's such an excess supply, that their value's gone down. So the values of the people the values of the people already own are dropping like a stone as well. And so in Chinese, more than America, Chinese individuals, Chinese companies base their wealth on real estate value. Okay, the average Chinese worker doesn't have the wherewithal nor the opportunity to invest in other outlets like, money market funds or CDs or the stock market or whatever else. And so for almost all your rank and file Chinese worker, their entire wealth is caught up in the real estate. And when those real estates are falling as badly as they are right now, then you're going to get a situation where you're going to start seeing evictions because they can't pay the rent or the mortgage payments. You're going to see a lot more doubling up in families, and they already do that much more here than they do here. You have a whole lot more of kids living with their parents than you do in the United States. And I'm going to get to the demographic problems in just a minute that the clip mentioned. But the point is that because the real estate problems are so severe, it's not going to be something that, Evergrande goes bust and that's, some fat cat's lost their wallet. There's going to be a massive trickle-down effect, like I said, a tsunami down effect that's going to affect millions and millions of Chinese people, even if they're not involved in the real estate sector. Because when companies go bankrupt here in the United States, there's a lot of other people that are affected by it. Other people don't get paid, and that's what happens. So if you have a company that is dependent upon Evergrande and they don't get paid, then this company goes out and their employees go out, and all the subsidiary industries that are related to real estate are going to be massively impacted by this. And the timing of this, varies from speculator to speculator. When is this going to happen? My guess, what I've been reading, within about 12 months or less. I would not doubt it maybe by the end of the year, because this is not sustainable. To have $390 billion of debt owed by the real estate sector to the country, and that's just the real estate sector, then you're going to have a real problem. And so I'm going to go on a couple of other factors that are real problems as well. But I will be referring to the real estate because underlying the whole thing, that's what's causing all this. Second thing she mentioned in the clip was the deflation, the devaluation of their currency. The deflation is more of a problem than inflation. Okay, we've been going through inflation quite a bit. It's been worse, a couple summers ago or last summer, but it's still not very good. Okay, they came out today 3.3% is what the rate that the Fed looks at. It's not what the government reports. The Fed has its own inflation index, and it's 3.3 inflation, which isn't catastrophic by any means. In Europe right now, it's 5.4, I think, is what I read. But it's still 3.3 is, when you compound it every month at that rate, it adds up pretty quick. Well, in China, it's going the other direction. And what happens with deflation is that not only does you think, well, prices coming down, isn't that a good thing? No, because when prices come down as a country, as an index, then so do wages. but the debts don't go anywhere. This is one of the things when I was teaching economics, and I'd say, is deflation a good thing or not? And the kids would think, well, lower prices isn't that good. Well, we're not talking about one industry like gasoline or something like that. We're talking about it as a whole. When prices are falling, so are wages. So is the ability of companies to pay their debts. So is the ability of the company to pay their employees. So the deflation was the main problem in the Depression we went through in the 1930s. I mean, everybody thinks of it as unemployment. Well, Depression was really triggered by deflation, and which begat unemployment. So deflation is one of the hardest things an economy has to endure. Now, the Chinese government doesn't have the tools at hand to try to change that at all. By the way, just on a side note, the last time we experienced deflation as a country was beginning of 2009, right after the fallout from the 2008 meltdown of all those New York banks and whatnot, and the bailouts, whatever else. We went through a deflationary period for about 2 or 3 months, and it triggered a lot of unemployment, things of that nature. So you could think of deflation as a triggering mechanism for all sorts of terrible things to happen to your economy. And that's what's happening right now. Now, the thing about it is does it make Chinese products cheaper to us, if we buy them? Well, the answer is yes, but, cheaper Chinese products also has led to a lot of problems here in the United States in certain industries. And so you're going to get a lot of resistance to having the Chinese try to flood markets, ours, the European Union, rest of Asia, whatnot, trying to bail themselves out of this mess, because it's going to cause ripple effects in all these other economies. So maybe, you might see a lowering of prices at Walmart that are based in China, but you're also going to have a situation where as that deflation continues, you might not see much more of those products from China because they're not going to be able to afford to produce them. And dumping their goods on us is going to cause us a problem. At the end of this monologue, I was going to talk about, what's impacting the United States, and that's one of them. We may end up going through another trade war and demands for tariffs and things like that. And so we'll see what happens with that. Another thing that's a real problem is the demographic part of it. China, under the Communist Party, has embarked on some disastrous social policies. The Great Leap Forward to the late 1950s, the Cultural Revolution, some of the other land consolidation plans and whatever else. Nothing, it probably tops their one-child policy that they embarked on about 35, 40 years ago and only recently lifted. What happened with the one-child policy is that they thought they were going to be so overpopulated, particularly in the urban areas, that they'd be unmanageable. So they demanded or commanded that you only get one child per couple. And what that did is it so skewed their demographics that China is already becoming one of the oldest societies in the world. It's a problem very similar to Japan. Now, Japan didn't have a one-child policy, but a lot of Chinese couples voluntarily or by their choice limited their families to one child or maybe two. And this is what's happened with Japan as well, is that they have a very old society. In China, in about 25 years, close to 40% of their population is going to be over the age of 65. And and a very small percentage of it is going to be, in working age in that time. The demographics are backwards for China. And when you have these massive numbers of elderly people, and they have a very, very scanty social safety net, they don't have Medicare and Social Security to the degree we do. Now, they have public payments. Yeah, they have, small pittances for their elderly, but almost all these old people are going to have to be supported by their families. And basically, you're talking about, again, not enough young people to be able to take care of these older people, either physically or financially. And the demographics are also skewed in another way, is that you have 35 million more men than women of marrying age right now in China. I'm not reading some of this, I'm just kind of go off the top of my head, but the 35 million more eligible bachelors than available women. And so what that also means is that you have a lot of these men don't marry. A lot of these men marry late and may not have any children. A lot of these men basically try to immigrate, which is, we know, very difficult in China. And so again, the possibilities of kind of reviving this demographic inverse relationship by having like a lot of kids isn't going to happen. They're not there. The couples aren't there to produce more children, because you have so many more available men than women. Then you're not going to be able to, have them marry and have children and all this other stuff. So the future generation also has been massively impacted by this one-child policy. And the best way I could put it is this, is that you're going to have probably a situation that almost every older person is going to be living with their one daughter or one son. And yet there's going to be more than just grandma. It's going to be both sets, of families are going to have to move in together. And Chinese apartments are not that big. You're going to talk about, it's going to resemble, if you want to have a mental picture, what Beijing already looks like. Think of the 19th century New York and the Gilded Age in some of those tenement slums. That's what's happening in the major cities right now. A lot of it is not just, they got all sorts of other problems, sanitation and infrastructure is all crap. But the point is also, you're going to have a situation, you're going to have about 7 or 8 people and multiple generations living in about a 2-bedroom apartment at most, maybe a 1-bedroom apartment. He said, and they're not going to have the ability, the wherewithal to move to a larger one. And it isn't like these older folks will be bringing in any kind of income other than their very, very pitiful amount of social safety net money. I don't know what the name of their Social Security program is, but it's nothing like ours. So the demographic is going to be very, very tough. And when you also have a situation where you have a declining economy as rapidly as it's declining, you're going to have a lot of unemployed young men. Okay? She mentioned this as well. 1 in 5 young Chinese person that is out of college now does not have a job. The phrase that I read a couple times is called lying flat. What that means in Chinese terms is basically they're just not going to participate in the economy because there's nothing for them to participate in that they see of value. They're not going to go out to some of these farms out in the country. They don't want to work in the factories because working in a factory in China is brutal and 72-hour weeks. It's, again, very Gilded Age kind of situation. And they have college degrees. There's over about 11.5 million college graduates last year in China, and many of them have no prospects of getting a job. And so they're just staying home, playing video games. Or they are, involved in the underground economy, which doesn't necessarily mean, drug and black market, all that junk. It doesn't mean crime necessarily. Underground market is just basically just off the books kind of business operations, with, legal or not. But the lying flat phenomenon basically means that, again, you're talking about a lot of young men are not out there trying to make a career, trying to get money, trying to get married. And so that's another demographic problem. But the unemployment rate is so bad in this sector in particular. China is, like the clip mentioned, quit reporting it about 1.5 years ago. Chinese statistics have always been suspect. It was like when, back in the 70s and 80s, and we were getting all this data about the Soviet Union's GDP and all this. I'm like, how are you getting that? And then we find out after the Soviet Union fell, well, they were lying to us. Surprise, surprise. They overstated their GDP and their economy by about 1/3. And a lot of international investors suspect that. In fact, that's one why a lot of international investment is dried up. Right now, it's 89% lower this year than it was a couple of years ago. And again, to tag on one last thing before the next clip, another disastrous policy the Chinese pursued was their COVID policy. We complained about shutdowns here. And in retrospect, there's a lot of things about those shutdowns that we now know that were harmful to our economy and certainly harmful to our education. But that's another topic. But Chinese, they shut it down so hard that I don't know if their economy is going to recover anytime soon. And when they shut it down, they meant business. It wasn't like, just to wear a mask and take COVID tests. They would literally lock their citizens in their homes. They would nail their doors shut to prevent them from leaving. And if you were caught outside during these shutdowns, you'd be facing criminal penalties. You had people dying in Beijing and Shanghai and all the major Chinese areas in their apartments because they couldn't get out and get more food or anything like that, or food or medicine couldn't be brought to them. And so a lot of people in China remember the COVID shutdowns, and it just absolutely killed their business. There's a really good article I read yesterday, New York Times, about this Chinese woman who created a chain of coffee shops in Beijing. And once COVID hit, they were mandated to be shut, and now they're all shut down. They're all bankrupt. In a sense, they did not reopen, and all the employees are gone and things of that nature. But their COVID shutdown, I think, did more damage to China than any single country in this world. And now I'm reading that we may have a COVID revival of some sort, and people in the government are talking about other types of shutdowns. I desperately hope that that's not the case. I don't think we need to have a shutdown. When the shutdowns happened, that raised some red flags with me, period. But we were dealing with something that's unknown, and we didn't have a vaccine and all this other business. And, we didn't have immunities built up, and I think a shutdown for us will do the same thing to our economy as it did to China's economy. Now, ours recovered to some degree. We still have after effects of it, but in China, it may be years, if ever. For China, that may be one event when you look back on their history in some future date, that may be a turning point in Chinese economic and political history. So I'm going to get to some other points in just a minute, but let's do the second round of sponsors, and also got a couple other clips. Thank you, Allard at Southern Gym. They're open right now. They got great inventory. They have repairs. They have designs. They have cleaning. They have a great staff. And I'm not just saying it just because of my wife, even though I've seen her at work. She's really, really good at this job. But Southern Gym is a great place to go for upcoming season, Christmas season. Now, I know it's hot and it's about 5 months away and all this other stuff, but if you want something done special, you're going to have to talk to Galen, pretty soon. If you walk in there the day before Christmas, they have it for you, absolutely. But if you want something like designed or some family heirloom repaired in time for Christmas, you need to talk to her in about October. She'll be on the show in the first week of November to talk about their Christmas season coming up. So Southern Gym, it's time. Take a look. Also, thank you to our friends at Old Pro. I had John on last Tuesday. John Williams at 817-734-2756. It was a really good show. I mean, he's got good talent at this kind of stuff. And, having your roof checked is one of the most important things you can do for your home. It's like your foundation. If your foundation and your roof aren't solid, you're going to have a real problem. And so you need to have them checked. And he'll come and give you an honest evaluation about the condition of your roof. So give him a holler at, again, 817-734-2756. Also, if you want an honest evaluation on your insurance, Texas Farm Bureau with Melissa Harmon, 682-804-0534. She'll check out your insurance. She'll see if she could save you money on the rates. She could see if you've got adequate coverage on your house. And so I would check all that out. Just give her a holler, and she could check all that out. So see what Melissa could say about your insurance. Sorry, I got a little something in my throat there. Anyway, also thank you to Lisa Moore-Smith. Lisa yesterday presented in our BNI meeting, and she's always such a lovely person. And showed us before and after scenes what happens with water damage and what they can do to clean it up. Also, I didn't really focus on this, but we talk about biohazard. She's talking about they get sometimes calls from when a family has a hoarder in the family and they, have acquired the home and they find all sorts of junk in it, and there's some people that, for whatever reason, just don't throw away anything. And then she showed us a couple of pictures that were just unbelievably crowded with junk and trash. And then they showed what they did afterwards. Also, if you have a water leak, if you have fire damage, they can help you with all these things. So give them a holler. Also, I mentioned her already today, Candy Gow over at U Mortgage. You give her a holler at 817-925-2661. You know, the rates are going to be there for a little while. You need to talk to somebody that knows what they're talking about, as opposed just to, you know, picking up the paper or whatever. You need to talk to Candy if you're considering a refinance or considering a new home, things of that nature. Talk to her. I've used her twice in my length of my home ownership. I've been in my home for about 30 years now, and it was really great service, and she knows what she's talking about. So give Candy a holler. Okay, where are we at? All right, Taylor, go ahead and show that second clip, if you will.
These are tough days in China for many who are young, looking for work, and just not finding it. This is a job fair on the outskirts of Beijing. The positions up for grabs here are mostly in sales or insurance. This year's job market has been difficult for newcomers, says Zhang Bo, who's 22 and just graduated from university, along with more than 11 million other people. Part of what's driving record youth unemployment here. It hit 21.3% in June. That's 1 in 5 young people between the ages of 16 and 24, and 4 times the overall jobless rate in China. Meng Zhe has been looking for 4 months, and he isn't hopeful. I don't know how to answer that, he says, but I'll keep looking. The gloomy prospects have young people seeking solace in online chat groups, and it seems at temples, where they are literally praying for luck. According to Trip.com, a travel booking platform here, temple visits across China are up 360% this year. Roughly half the visitors born after 1990. I'm wishing for more career luck, says this woman. Everyone is stressed out and competitive at school, she told us. Everyone is tired. The lack of jobs here goes deeper than the numbers. It's more structural. The jobs eluding most highly educated workers weren't lost from the economy per se. They've never existed. Back at the job fair, Ms. Bai is a recruiter. She talked about an imbalance on the hiring side, too, in that skills aren't matching needs. She has one position to fill with a moving company. And it's not just young people feeling the impact of a slowing post-COVID economy here, with big tech companies like Alibaba making deep cuts. Middle-aged and older workers are losing jobs and finding it hard to compete with young people who will work more for less. A phenomenon known as the curse of 35, now making the rounds on Chinese social media, saying that getting hired past the age of 35 is nearly impossible because companies think those employees are less likely to work overtime. It's gotten so bad, Chinese state media is even acknowledging it, with the Workers' Daily newspaper devoting an editorial to ending age discrimination. Liu Guorong and her husband are both 60. People in their 40s have to support the elderly and raise children, she says. There are knock-on effects of these labor shifts, too. As unemployment has climbed, the number of marriage license applications hit a new low. Property sales and spending have slowed. There are even some parents now paying their kids to be full-time children, mostly to do housework and be available when needed, as people wait or pray for better days.
And Janice joins me now from
go ahead.
Beijing.
Janice,
you mentioned in the piece there.
Thanks. That was a good clip because it explained better what I was trying to say. What I thought was interesting is two things. That paying to be full-time children, that's kind of the lying flat phenomenon. Second of all, the fact that marriage licenses that are an all-time low has to do with what I mentioned prior, that the great imbalance between eligible men and women. And so that's going to have long-term effects. And also, I have to admit, I don't know if amused is a word, but I found it strikingly ironic that temple attendance, Buddhist temple attendance, has increased. This is something that really is kind of off the topic about Chinese economic problems, but the Chinese Christian church is growing rapidly and has been for about 20 years. And you're going to get a situation pretty soon. I think I read something last month or something like that, that China, there's more Chinese Christians than any other single ethnicity. Of course, being the fact there's 1.4 billion Chinese makes a difference, but there are millions and millions of Chinese Christians. And that is something that the Communist Party is looking upon with a great deal of suspicion and hostility. But that's kind of another topic as well. Now, but the fact is that clip brought it out very clearly how difficult it is for these young people to get a job. They're getting maybe a job offer to work in a factory, but these are college-educated people, and they expect college-educated type jobs. And the older generation, particularly the older generation of the Communist Party leadership, like Xi Jinping, they are angry with these young people for not doing what they did back in the day, which is go work on some collective farm or take a factory job or whatever else. In a recent speech, Xi Jinping told the young people to, quote, eat bitterness, which is another way of saying suck it up. Okay, they expect these young people just to take the jobs and shut up, and that's not going over well either. Okay, and so you have a situation where you get a growing mass of unemployable or unemployed or underemployed people that are not going to be content to, quote, eat bitterness. They find that to be insulting, to say the least. And the fact of the lowering birth rates, it can't be overstated, because what they also saw in that clip is, they were talking about the 40-year-olds trying to take care of kids and parents. Well, those 40-year-olds are going to be 60-year-olds soon, and who's going to take care of all of those people? You're talking about a compounding problem within families. And so I'm not only taking care of my elderly parents, but maybe my elderly grandparents as well. So that to me is the biggest problem China faces, along with the debt. There's a couple other debt figures, by the way, I kind of skipped over. The local governments borrowed money to increase massive infrastructure projects at great cost, in many cases, to the Chinese agricultural sector. The displacement of farmers is what I'm referring to. Land which is, when they have eminent domain, they do not pay the farmers for it. This is for the needs of the party and the state, so thank you, beat it. They're not going to get any kind of settlement. They'll get moved somewhere, but as far as getting paid, forget it. And so the Chinese local governments vastly overextend themselves in building infrastructure of all various kinds. And it's estimated that the combined debt of the local government units, and this is not the central government, but the local government units, exceeds $13 trillion. Where they're going to get that money, no one has any idea. And so, again, you're looking at workers and vendors being stiffed on that debt. So you kind of go back to the real estate. If you boil it all down, they vastly overextended themselves, and they have no way of making that profitable of any kind, even breaking even of any kind. They don't have the tools at their disposal to do it. And so you're looking at a situation, just on the real estate side alone, you're going to see some dominoes falling. There's a couple other things as well that's been kind of a phenomenon, and that's the Chinese buying American property. Right now, 33 states have passed laws, or in the process of passing laws, against Chinese ownership of land. Now, the percentage isn't alarming as much as the location, okay? Where the Chinese are buying property is often quite close to military installations. I was talking to the king of Kiowa County about this, and they're buying property around Air Force bases in Oklahoma. And they did so in North Dakota, around Minot. And so you're going to have, it's not just the fact of a cumulative amount that they own, which is, millions of acres, but it's where they're buying it. Now, that also being said, a lot of this is not being used for agricultural purposes yet, if at all. And so a lot of the states are very concerned that the Chinese are going to buy up all the available property and then become, in effect, landlords, and they don't want Chinese landlords. And people, who criticize, they're saying this is racist, this is like reminiscent of the Chinese Exclusion Act of the 1880s. That act in the 1880s was racially oriented by far and unapologetically racist. This situation is more of a national security issue. When the Japanese are buying a lot of property and whatnot, and when I was a kid and in college days, we looked upon Japan the way people look upon China now, as they're going to come, as Joe Biden said, eat our lunch. You know, Joe Biden thought the Chinese were going to come and take us over a couple of years ago when he was running for president. And we thought the Japanese could do everything. They bought, you know, properties all over, you know, Rockefeller Center, Seattle Mariners, Pebble Beach Golf Course, you know, all these high-profile things. And then there, some of the things that happened or happening in China happened to Japan in the 90s. Demographic problems, aging population, declining exports, devaluation of their currency, the yen fell in value and things like so. If you want to see what is happening historically to China, look to Japan about 30 years ago. Well, that being said, back to the land issues, a lot of states don't want Chinese ownership of land, particularly near sensitive military installations. And, you know, you have Chinese Americans who feel discriminated against. Now, I understand that feeling. If they are American citizens and they have no ties to the Communist Party, I think their ethnic origin has zero to do with whether they should buy land or not. But we're not talking about that kind of thing. We're talking about people that are Chinese nationals with connections to the Communist Party buying this property. That's the problem. We're not discriminating against the Chinese American who want, you know, or a Taiwanese citizen that wants to buy property. It's those with communist ties. And the only people with the wherewithal to be able to buy this amount of land in those kind of locations have strong ties to Xi Jinping and his communist leadership. Nobody in China gets to be a billionaire or a multimillionaire without connections to the Communist Party, period. You don't have independent actors. And so that's why we are concerned. I would be concerned about Chinese ownership of land. The third clip kind of talks about it as well. This was on NBC News about a week ago.
In China, a growing number of states are seeking to ban Chinese companies from buying American land. But how big is the potential risk to U.S. security? Here's Ryan Nobles.
In Montana, fears about the security threat from China have been growing ever since that Chinese spy balloon soared across its famous big sky.
The Chinese spy balloon was right above us. That woke a lot of people up.
And it's not just worries about America's vulnerability from the air. Now, one of Montana's senators is pushing to keep the Chinese government from buying land nationwide.
China is not our friend right now, and the Chinese Communist Party wants to do bad things.
Senator John Tester is proposing a ban on entities with ties to China and 3 other foreign adversaries from buying American farmland and wants to beef up monitoring of land transactions to foreign buyers.
Right now, we're not paying any attention to it.
The push to prohibit foreign land purchases from China has exploded across America. 15 states have passed laws regulating the practice. Much of the focus coming after controversial purchases in Texas and North Dakota, where Chinese companies bought land and failed to disclose it to the U.S. government. In Grand Forks, North Dakota, city officials recently blocked construction on land purchased by a Chinese company just 12 miles from Grand Forks Air Force Base. The company has said it's just a corn mill and not an espionage risk. But the Air Force had warned that the project presented a, quote, significant threat to national security. Overall, U.S. intelligence rates the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, as a top security threat.
The CCP represents both the leading and most consequential threat to U.S. national security and leadership globally.
Though an NBC News review tonight finding nationwide the amount of American land being purchased by Chinese entities appears to be small. Since early 2022, less than 1,400 acres sold to businesses tied to China have been reported to the USDA so far. In total, it appears China controls less than 400,000 acres of American land, which is less than 1% of all the land owned by foreign entities. Here in Montana, a state law banning Chinese citizens from buying land passed with bipartisan support. Brad Molnar was the only Republican to vote no.
You create the dragon. There never was a dragon.
He says the law is an overreach and would prevent his wife, a Chinese national, from being able to inherit his land after he dies.
There's no evidence that I'm aware of that the people that own the land are in any way a threat to American security. If they are, arrest them and remove them.
Tonight, Tester tells us more action is needed to counter the security risk from the Chinese government.
Are you concerned that we don't even know how much land China has potentially purchased already?
I don't think we know how much land they bought. This is prospective. This will stop it happening before it becomes a situation where we go, oh, gee, we wish we'd have done something about that in 2023.
While Tester's amendment did pass with wide bipartisan support, it's part of a larger defense package that still needs to be negotiated between the House and Senate in the months ahead.
All right. You know what I find to be interesting about that in particular is John Tester is a Democrat senator from Montana. And so this is not some sort of MAGA thing or, right-wing paranoia. And Tester has been the leading senator. Now, he's up for re-election next year, so no doubt he's got a lot at stake at it. But for it to have bipartisan support in the Senate is not normal, in these days of polarized parties. But so before, people were yelling and hollering about, that this is some sort of right-wing xenophobia. Look at Tester and some of the people that support it. Also, you saw Avril Haines, who is a security director, and she talked about the Chinese Communist Party as one of the main threats we face as a country. That balloon episode that when it floated over Montana and all the way through across the United States was a disgrace. It was embarrassing. And the Biden response to that was beyond incompetent. They did pick up valuable information, as it turns out. And it just the fact that they could so brazenly fly something like that across our country in full view of millions of Americans tells us exactly what was said in that clip. The Chinese are not our friends. We may do business with them some, and on that score, we are doing less than we used to. But the Chinese are not our friends. President Biden had just declared last week certain bans on technologies that could be used for military uses in China. So there's some American companies, some products and technologies that are going to be banned for export to China. Now, will they get it? Sure, they'll get it through a third party or whatever else. It'll be more expensive for them, and it'll be a lot more hassle for them. But as far as at least as official policy, there's certain technologies which it's way over my head what it is. But if they could be used for military purposes, they're not to go to China. I generally support that, okay? I support that for the most part because I understand we can't be paying or getting paid to hang ourselves. This is what Lyndon had a very famous expression that capitalists will sell us a rope in which we'll hang them with. Well, that's the kind of thing here. If we're going to sell them technologies that they're going to use against us in our military at one point, we have it coming. Now, that old man at the end talking about how the dragon didn't exist, he's delusional. I'm sure he's affected by this because of his Chinese wife, and that's great, but he's delusional. China is a threat, and in so many ways. And that gets back to my last piece here. How does this affect us, the United States? Well, I've been hitting about that all throughout the show, but one is we're going to have more trade war as China tries to export their way out of this problem. They're going to have more trade wars, and tariffs will be demanded, and you're going to have industries that are going to be in conflict and things of that nature. Another thing that's going to happen is this is a common tactic by dictatorial countries. They try to distract their own people through outside provocations, and I'm talking about Taiwan in particular. I am convinced either towards the end of this administration, within a couple of years, and if Mr. Biden is reelected, which we'll see. Who knows? That's another show. We will have China. I don't think will let Taiwan exist much longer. Another thing that, on a side issue, why is Taiwan so important to us? That's where we get most of our computer chips, our microchips. Now, last year we passed this massive bill to try to stimulate American building of chips, but it ain't going to happen overnight. It's going to take 20 years. And so Taiwan is critical to our national defense and our economy. Our little cell phones are dependent upon Taiwanese chips. So I'm convinced before the end of this decade, probably within the next 2-3 years, we will have a major military confrontation over Taiwan. And a lot of it is going to be driven by the economic distress going on. Because that's common with dictatorships. That's what the Middle Eastern countries have been doing with Israel for years. Okay, these people here are unhappy. Let's focus on Israel and take their attention and mind off of it and blame everything on them. Well, that's what's happening here is the Chinese government's trying to point to Taiwan as somehow a threat and try to distract the attention of its people. I do not think it's going to be as universally supported in China as one might think, particularly go back to the one-child policy. A lot of these people do not want their only sons to go into the Chinese military because they don't want to have a situation where maybe their lifeline for support will be cut off if their only son is killed in some sort of military confrontation. All right. Also, the thing about it is, can they increase the amount of their currency to kind of stop the deflation and cause inflation? Well, that's an unpopular situation as well, because the inflation will cause even more hardships on the people than they have now. I read one of my preparation readings that Beijing is one of the most expensive places in the world to raise a child. And if you tack on inflation, higher prices on that, you're going to cause even more public distress. What I fully see within the next 18 months is you're going to start seeing more public outbursts and more public protests against this situation. And the Chinese are going to say, aren't they exhibiting their First Amendment rights kind of routine? They're going to crack down on like they did Tiananmen Square back in 1989. I fully expect within the next 12 to 18 months, you're going to see more and more of these kind of Tiananmen Square type activities where the public just can't take any more. And you'll have these public uprisings and riots and protests and, damage in Beijing and Shanghai shopping areas and things of that nature. And so the prospects for China are not good in the future because of their demographics and their real estate debt. Well, I mean, it's all tied together, so there you are. But I fully expect that if they try to solve it through inflation or something similar to that, or trade-based policies, they're going to end up exasperating the problem quite a bit. Well, there you are. There's the old professor's lesson on economics for the day, so I hope this was helpful. I found the reading to be pretty interesting because I started doing this about 2 weeks ago, getting readings together, and I wasn't aware of the extent of the problem until I started reading this. And I got all my sources from New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, National Review, Politico, Forbes, Bloomberg. So it's a fairly wide range and they all are coming to the same conclusion. It's going to be big trouble in China very soon. Okay, next week, Taylor and I are going to be taking Labor Day off, and so y'all can enjoy the 110-degree Labor Day holiday. Oh. Yeah, ain't that right? And also then on Tuesday, Cabrina is coming back. I thought maybe the last show might be our last one, but fortunately she's going to be around one more time. So Cabrina Daniels of the Chamber of Commerce will be here. On Thursday, we're going to kind of have a celebration of sorts. It'll be a 4-year anniversary, and Camille Branson's going to be on the show. She was on many of the earlier shows when we first started doing this back in 2019. So Camille is going to be on, and we're just going to reminisce a bit and talk about fun things. So we look forward to seeing you. September's got a lot of good things coming up, so I look forward to seeing you on the other side of the weekend.